prison not only teaches you how to be a criminal, it teaches you how to logically defend that position.
Yes.
I mean, not only, what I'm trying to say is that you can have a convict right here, right now, and he will begin to speak to you about the most brilliant ways to reform prison, and then go outside and start committing crimes like you've never seen him do. They commit the crime already having come from a war zone of dehumanization. When they commit a crime, they're drug abusers. They're suffering from alcoholism. They have severe problems in a dysfunctional family. They are lost. They have no center. They have peers who are indulging in drugs. They have no role models. It's pretty much a chaotic world that I can't even imagine how bad it is for a young adult. But when they come to that crime, they come already dehumanized. And then when the police arrive, it's been upgraded now. And then when they go to jail, it's not only dehumanization step 2. When they go to jail, it's a nightmare for the parents outside to try to get any sort of legal help for the person. The person inside is on the phone screaming to his mother, "You got to get me out of here, man." It's trauma built on trauma built on trauma. Saying, and then to try to get a lawyer, you can get a public defender, but to try to get somebody in your corner that you pay, they don't have any money to pay, So you get the lawyer, you go to court, and then you have this long labyrinth of obstacles that you have to overcome before you even get to court, and you're already been dehumanized multiple times, and then the judge expects you, and it's only right. You committed a crime. I don't want you getting in trouble again. But in that 2-month window, the only persons that he has with him are the people that he helped get him in trouble in the first place. So he goes back to the familiar environment, right? He goes back to the familiar environment. He gets in trouble again. And all of a sudden, the lawyer who is representing him says, "Look, this is crazy. I tell you have to stay out of this, and you're in it again." So now the kid is traumatized by hopelessness and despair and no way out. And then the system just builds on its dehumanization, builds and builds and builds on it as if it's architecturally set that way in the system. As if there's no stopping point, there's no rest area along the way on this road to hell. There doesn't seem to be a rest area. So consequently, the kid has to return back to a broken family, to friends who are doing drugs, to the only outlet is a cheap bottle of liquor or a cheap hit of meth. I mean, it's just this merry-go-round of nightmares. And so, by the time the kid goes to sentencing, it's a relief to go to prison. Just put me in a cell because I can't deal with all of this. Because of all the necessities that it demands, I don't have any choice in matter because I have no money. I've got no choice. So just get me to a place where I don't have to make choices anymore, to a place where I don't have drugs, to a place where I don't have these friends. So just get me to another place. And so that by the time he gets to prison, it's dehumanization step 4.
The system is so fundamentally set up to ensure that people fail. And I think that's obvious for people that see it up close. I don't think it's that obvious to the wider public. And when I talk about the system, I'm not just talking about systems of incarceration, but some of the things that you're getting at, which are how is our society set up in the outside world so that we're continuously failing these kids? And, some kids, or some people are going to be violent, right? That happens in every society and has throughout the world. But the sheer number of people that our society views as disposable and then shoots them into these systems, they get churned up and then spit out just so that they can fail again is shocking.
One of the things that has really, really impacted me recently over the past, my daughter went to Spain recently for a month, and she comes back and she tells me, "Papi, there's no homeless people up here." I didn't see one, Papi, and I took the trains all the way to Italy and everywhere. I didn't see one homeless person. So what happens when we just see this epidemic of homelessness? It's like Frank said again, do the right thing. So individually, we've decided to do the right thing ourselves because there doesn't seem to be any social services that are accommodating the homelessness, right? So we do what we can. Uh, the other thing that really bothers me, in which I'm trying to put all my resources into right now, is the mental illness of the homeless. Everywhere I go, not only the homeless, but half of my friends have a child who's suffering from mental illness. And there's no facilities. I constantly get calls saying, can you get us into the hospital, Jimmy? And there doesn't seem to be any other place that'll take them. So it is like, you talk about dehumanization, it falls on the mother at home to try to deal with the kid who's suffering from schizophrenia. And then she has to work, she has to pay the bills, she has to take care of this kid. It just seems to be all these hopeless areas with no answers to them, you know?
I think one thing we see with all of our clients, all of the people that reach out to us day after day, is that almost all of the people in prisons and jails here in New Mexico have some sort of mental health issue or they have some sort of substance use disorder. And the question for me, going back to doing the right thing, is are our prisons and jails the right way to deal with those issues? And the answer is clearly no.
No, absolutely not.
No. It's expensive to run prisons and jails too. Part of our job at the New Mexico Prison and Jail Project, our bigger picture, is to make prisons and jails so expensive to run that our society will make some other choices, because this isn't working to begin with. Everyone cares about public safety, safety in our communities, but this is not working.
You know, it just eludes any type of imaginative solution, because when you get a kid who's done the crime, goes the labyrinth of the judicial system, ends up in prison after all of that, and then you subject that poor child to an atmosphere of terror, subject the poor child to predators, it doesn't help his mental illness. It intensifies it to a disorder that now is calling for medication up the scale, you know? So then not only dehumanizes, but it brutalizes the spirit. And the only way to find any sort of sanctuary there is to join a gang, because that's the only way to go. You have to join a gang, otherwise you're going to set yourself up as a prey for the predators. And is that a solution for your mental illness, to join a gang and be told who to stab and what to take and what to bully people, you know, stuff? No, but it seems to be the only place they have any protection.
And a survival skill.
Yeah.
It's a survival skill, you know, especially for our younger generation now. I mean, they're going in younger. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard, you know, the juvenile detention center, they don't even have room for any more kids in there, you know.
It's pretty bad out here, yeah.
So what are we doing to help them? You know, what services are we providing? You know, it's sad.
Were you incarcerated at any time?
No.
You weren't? Well, you were, because you're a lawyer, so you must know.
Hey, but I'm incarcerated now because I feel like I am with my son.
Exactly. So no, you can answer this question good then. And my friend here he's been a journalist, and he was a very good journalist at one time working for the Alibi. His articles were he worked really hard. Why'd you quit, by the way? You were such a good journalist.
I needed a change, and I care about this stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
Huh. I'll never forget when they used to bring the legislatures in the prisons, and I was in a prison in Arizona. They used to bring the legislatures through the prison. I was so humiliated by these strangers looking inside the cage at me, that I turned my back to them because I was humiliated.
Yeah.
And then humiliation becomes status quo with the warden and the guards and everybody. They humiliate you on a daily basis, but that's different than having somebody outside of the prison system look at you like these legislators who came in and they looked through the little port window as if you're an animal. And I couldn't bear it. I had to turn my back. I couldn't. I couldn't. I was so ashamed. And that's not talking about the self. That's not talking about the conscious shame, the moral shame that you suffer as an individual when you walk through the gates, and you know you've disappointed the only people that love you, your grandmother perhaps. That you probably grew up with your grandma, and she's probably given her whole life to you, and now this is your response to her care. So you're humiliated and ashamed at that. You're also humiliated and ashamed by being classified as a criminal, because now you carry the brand of a convict. You're humiliated and shamed because you never amounted to anything. And it's surprising, most of these kids that you meet in prison, many, if not all, actually started out very normal kids, playing basketball at their elementary school, playing soccer in their junior high school, liking their teachers, enjoying classes. And then something happened emotionally that broke them, that they needed help and the help wasn't there.
I feel that that's what happened with my son, is he started to struggle academically. And I was continuously every year trying to find resources for him, getting him tested. It took me, I think, 3.5 years to even get him tested for special education. I had a teacher call me one evening at 8 o'clock in the evening, and she said, I could get fired for calling and telling you this. She said, but I can't go to bed another night knowing the mistreatment that your son's getting at our school because of what he struggles with.
Well, that's really a lot of humiliation too.
Yeah. So I feel that for my son, it started with APS. It started with our school system. You know, they didn't get him into special education until he was a sophomore in high school. And who, as a sophomore in high school, wants to start going into special ed classes? Because you're trying to gain momentum of becoming who you are. You're trying to find your identity, you know? And he would come home and he's like, I don't want to go to those classes. That's embarrassing, you know? So there was a lot of his humiliation started in elementary school, you know?
You know, and the thing that humiliation and loneliness, the thing that really both I applaud and deplore is the South Valley really does with its language being Chicanismo or Spanish, if you will, Mexican, with its Chicano cultural celebrations, farmers market, the fairs that they have, and stuff like that, the folk fairs that they have, folk art. A lot of the santeros, a lot of the musicians, a lot of the dancers, a lot of the poets, they all have their homes down there, and they all reach out to the community. The South Valley, when it comes to New Mexico, probably has the strongest community network of any other place in the state. And that's good. But if you go beyond the South Valley to some of the big high schools in the city and stuff like that, loneliness is rampant because there's no community. You speak of having a business in Nob Hill. In Nob Hill, there's no community in Nob Hill. None. I mean, as a businessman, yes. As a cultural person, no. You know, in many, many communities, people are just too busy surviving. And the thing that happened with the kids since COVID, and COVID was disastrous, but since COVID, the loneliness has become a medical issue now.
Right.
I can't think of one single thing that the kids can be part of unless you go into an organized thing like soccer or basketball and stuff. But if you're not a jock, you know, if you just want to go someplace to be a teenager, there's no place. They have the parks and they have those chuck wagons that appear there. You know, they call that, they have a name for it where kids, Tasty Tuesdays or something, where all the kids go there, and it's cool. But there are very, very, very rare places where a child can go. And what happens if you're a Chicano, and what happens if your culture happens to be heavily dependent on Mexican history, Mexican lineage, Mexican legacy? What happens if your parents are field workers? What happens if your parents are, you know, and they really don't. See, in the South Valley, people accommodate each other because they can't speak English or Spanish, they help. But in the broader area of Albuquerque, if you speak Spanish somewhere in the store, you'll get people staring at you. So loneliness continues to be exploited.
Right.
It's what runs the prison is your loneliness. The reason you want to strike out and hit somebody or stab them is because you're so lonely. And the reason that you don't care about your life anymore is because you're so alone. There's not a man in that prison or any other prison that hasn't been humiliated since birth, you know? And I would even venture to say 80% have been sexually abused. So that's the ultimate of humiliation. For a man who's trying to acquire his definition of manhood, to have to carry that with you,
Which also happened to my son at Madison Middle School.
to have to carry that with
Oh,
you,
wow.
could you imagine that? That you were sexually abused? If you got a couple of $100,000, you can hire yourself a beautiful therapist, go sit there every day for $400 an hour and talk about how you were sexually abused, right? But if you don't have that $400 an hour to give your therapist, you keep that secret with you. And it comes out when you start drinking. It comes out when you do your meth. It comes out when you start doing your crack.
And there's the isolation again.
And then you're isolated. Yeah, you have to. It's just a continual withdrawal from humanity. And you know what? It just doesn't pertain to people who have gone to prison and stuff, because it seems more and more that those that are connected to prison in some way are also connected to people in society who are indifferent but related to them. So there's a whole area of gated communities in the city who have people that are out on the streets right now who have kids, uncles, dads, mothers, fathers, whatever. They're all out on the streets. They're all doing drugs. They're all in bars. They may have followed the American dream to get there, but they did so at the peril of destroying everything that is close to them. So they're really not gated. They're communities of despair. What I'm trying to say is that we're all connected, and we all seem to be in an environment that's connected to despair.
You know, you mentioned the South Valley, and as I indicated, that's one of my sources of pride, being born and raised and still living in the South Valley. And you're so right about that. You're absolutely so right. And we do have that sense of community. I was talking to a businessman in the Valley who just from, I don't know where he came from, but he had only been there a few months. I went into his store and he said, you know, one thing I've noticed about the South Valley, it has such a sense of community. He'd only been there a few months and he had already picked that up. So that's a strength that we can build on, and the fact that there's family, and unfortunately what's happening is changing, right? But when I was growing up, you had that strong sense of community, the strong sense of family connections with the neighbors knew your parents, and you know, it kept you in line because they would call your mom and dad, and you had an uncle and a tia over here, and that sort of thing. And so unfortunately that's changing, but I think that's a strength of our community that we need to sort of restore and just very much appreciate and develop. And I think over the last 20 years that I've lived all my life, I've seen some changes in the community that has taken away some of that sense of community and the things that kept, you know, kids in line. But I think we have to look at it that way and realize that that is something that there are challenges. And let's be honest about the challenges, but there's also that strength in the community if we just realize it and appreciate it. And other people, I think, should be, you know, I think it's something we should brag about, should be proud about. And I do every time I get an opportunity because it's valuable. And I think it supports our kids and our youth.
Gentrification is a big, dangerous impediment that's coming your way more and more, because once one street's gentrified, then it doesn't stop there. It goes to the next street and the next, and pretty soon the Chicanos who have lived there for 5, 6 generations, 300 years, are no longer allowed to walk down that street without the cops being called to say, "Hey, there's somebody here." So gentrification, Frank, is something you're gonna have to put a halt to, you know. And look what happened to Edith. Look what happened to Sticks Barrio. Look what happened to Edith and Central. That used to be all Chicano houses. And now if you see a Chicano walking down the street, they'll call the cops on you.
You know, Jimmy, I will agree with you on that, because growing up, I grew up on the West Side. Growing up, I had some friends that lived in the Heights, and I now live in the Northeast Heights, but I had some friends that lived in the Heights, and their parents used to tell me, "You can't go to her house. She lives on the other side of the bridge." And that even made me feel isolated. You know, what's wrong with me that they don't want their kids to hang out with me because I live on the other side of the river, you
Right.
know? So, I mean, it starts with even stuff like that, making you feel isolated.
There's so many ways in which society has been set up to not be equal, right? And I think maybe this is a good time to insert this, but there was an incredible study put out by the National Research Council in 2014, I think. It's called The Growth of Incarceration in the United States. It's this 300-page whopper that I've read twice. But there's solutions in there for this problem that we're talking about, the narrow problem of how people are humiliated and disposed of in a carceral context. And those solutions are pretty obvious. It's people don't have access to equal education, right? I think a lot of schools are viewed basically as cheap daycare or something. Kids aren't getting great educations. They're not getting equal education. There aren't equal opportunities to get good jobs. There aren't equal access to healthcare and mental health treatment across the board. Those things out in society feed our prisons and jails. And we could stop it if we wanted to as a country.
Yeah.
We've chosen not to because we're treating so many people as disposable.
Right.
And politics, I think, plays a big part in this, and so does social activism, so does law. But Blood and Blood Out, we did that movie 30 years ago.
Right.
I don't really know how to navigate the internet, so I'm a writer, so I just write. But as the 30-year anniversary was coming close, I started getting all these emails from people from all over the world, from Japan, India, England, Germany, Africa, everywhere. And then they showed me that these people in Texas and stuff that have Blood and Blood Out things on the internet, 3 million here, 6 million here, 9 million. I'm like, holy, wow. So I thought, well, this is crazy. So we get a hold of LA Times, and they said, dude, I grew up with that. Some of the best journalists at the LA Times. So we go to Disney, and they said, oh no, we can't bring that back. It's not even on any of the platforms like any Hulu or Disney or Max or anything. It's on none of them. So the photographer says, can we do a book on it? And we're like, So to do a coffee table book runs about $500,000, right? So we got a hold of 2 publishers. They said, absolutely not. It's prohibitive. We can't do that. So we got a publisher finally that said, we'll give you half the money. Me and the director, we'll give you half the money. You put up half the money. We'll come up with a book. So we came up with a coffee table book. Disney allowed us for the first time ever, never allowed anybody, to go into the archives and pick out the photographs that we wanted. So we got the book. Then we got Luis Valdez, who did La Bamba, wrote the introduction. Then we got all these famous, great, amazing people that were in the movie, all the famous actors to come in. So before you knew it, it was on. And the LA Times was doing feature articles front page. And all of a sudden you had this massive international uproar over the movie coming back, and you found out that there was this massive community out there all over the world, 300 million people. And Disney said, well, heck, we got to check this out, right? Because all they saw was money,
We saw
right?
the numbers.
Yeah.
So they let us have that. We put it
Always.
together. We got the publisher. And all of a sudden we had our first big anniversary at the University of California, one of the big universities, Los Angeles State in LA. But the point I'm trying to say is this, is that the movie was all about the culture of incarceration, the culture of dysfunction, the culture of what happens when gang members, what happens when one goes to the army, one becomes an artist, the other one goes to prison. It's all about that, using our language, our legacy, our heritage, and it struck an international nerve that even made Disney say, we want in on this. LA Times did a second feature, third feature. Los Angeles Times, that big old tree in Blood and Blood Out, El Pino, they memorialized that as one of the sites that you go to Los Angeles to see now, like the museum. So you go to El Pino. That it was not Disney, it was not the corporations, it was none of those people. It was la plebe, la gente who brought the movie back. Mm-hmm. It was their love of that movie that brought that movie back. And that can happen with this industrialization of prison and putting people away with the help of lawyers and politicians and social activists like yourself and businesswomen, it can happen.
Yep.
The people can put a stop to this machine devouring our young men and women. And that's really all it is. You come to the prison over here, you see a lot of young kids, uneducated, illiterate, many of them mentally ill. Mm-hmm. You just see the prison just gorging on these young people. You know, on loneliness and dehumanization, there's no better system in the world than prison. When I went to prison, and you all could answer your own, but cultural identity, I walked in as a Chicano, and I was traumatized because my mother was murdered, my father was died in the gutter as a drunk, my brother was murdered. But when I walked in, I was a straight up hardcore Chicano, and there's no way I was going to talk to a white dude or a black dude. There's no way you're going to sit at my table. There's no way you're going to walk in my cell. I had to be with my gente, right? That was both good and really bad, because it reinforced racism that was never there. But as soon as I walked through the gates, my cultural identity said, yo soy Chicano and I'm going to hang with my people, you know? So right away, boom, I'm reinforcing the prison racism structure, right? The hierarchy. And then the trauma, of course, with my own people inflicting violence on each other,
right,
was even more traumatic for me, because I would be in the same cell where they were plotting to kill 2 other Chicanos over drugs or stuff like that. And I was like, you know what, this ain't working.
As I mentioned, I've never been incarcerated myself, so I can only comment on this from the outside.
On experience, right?
But it seems to me that a lot of the racism, identity politics issues that flood through our entire society get intensified to some extent among people that are incarcerated. And you see those like racial divisions are so stark. I mean, you see them throughout our entire culture, right? But in prisons and jails, it's like those lines are sharp.
It starts here in society, you're right.
Yeah. And, in close confines, in a place that's designed to dehumanize people, I think the answer is a lot of what you were talking about, those cultural creations, being a poet, writing a place to stand. How do you give people a window into what life is like there? And you do that through things like your memoir, for sure. And then how does that translate into politics, right? That trauma, all those negative things that you experienced while you were in there, you channel it into something good. In my experience, no offense, but politicians rarely do things just because they think it's right, unfortunately. My experience working up at the legislature is people have to be forced to do the right thing, usually 99% of the time. And that comes from moms, people who have been incarcerated, taking that trauma and channeling it so politicians will finally do the right thing.
It's very disturbing how morally bankrupt our society's become, because in order to prepare for prison, society is a great preparing ground. I mean, it's the greatest place in the world to hate whites,
right?
Don't have anything to do with blacks,
right.
Hate cops. This is the best place in the world to train for hating cops, hate white people, hate any authority, curse the judge out, don't pay your lawyer. It just goes on. And then when you get to prison, you're like set, dude. I mean, blacks ain't sitting at this table. Whites ain't sitting at this table. And if you belong to another neighborhood, another barrio, you don't sit at this table. I mean, it was all trained here where we're at now. This is where the training grounds are. When you get to prison, that's where you start to practice what you learned.
right.
It's what makes you feel fulfilled as a man, that you've graduated now to the place where you can now make an opinion on it. You can say, you're not sitting at this table. While before you were sort of tentative and holding back, thinking, well, it's okay. I don't have anything against white people. Until the guy next to you says, wait, if I was scared, all white people are bad. Okay, then you're bad. And then all of a sudden you have it. You just have this
Because we take on other people's truths.
My identity has been shattered 1,000 times. I've had to put it back together again, because the propositions that society and my own gente keep throwing at me make me question whether or not who I am.
And am I doing the right thing? Am I
Yeah.
hanging with the right people? Do I like the right people?
Who am I?
Right.
I mean, like my daughter and my son's like, who am I? I mean, are we like do we just do drugs and smuggle weed and steal cars? And I mean, who are we? Or do we go the other way and strip ourselves of our cultural identity till we hit the glass window and look back and look at all the divorce and the wreckage that we've created trying to be acceptable to society when they never accepted us? So who the hell are we now? We went this way. We destroyed our families. We tried to get a career. We tried to do what they said. And all of a sudden, boom, we hit the glass thing. You're not allowed because you're Hispanic or whatever they want to call it. You go the other way. To be a real Chicano, you got to end up in prison doing heroin and selling meth and whatever. So, no, I had to constantly redefine what it was for me to be a Chicano and my identity.
And because we lack community efficacy. You know, nobody
Right.
wants to work together. Like you guys were saying about the South Valley. Yes, there is unity there. You know, me growing up on the West Side, and I'll be honest with you, when my brother ended up being, he started heroin at the age of 19 years old. We lived on the West Side, and we lived on like Central and Unser area. It's where I grew up. Well, when I'm a single parent, and as my kids were starting to get older, I thought, man, you know what? Maybe I better move, because I'm in survival mode, right? Because when you're a single parent, you're in survival mode. So I'm like, I better move my kids to a better school district. They were going to private school at that time because my parents, they co-parented with me, and they helped me pay their tuition. I was working 2 jobs. I was working at their school so I can get a discount, and then I was working at a salon. So for me, I thought, I'm going to move them where there's a good school district. And I moved up here to the Northeast Heights. I moved to Eubank and Osuna. Thinking in my head, well, if I move them to a good school district, then maybe they won't go the route my brother went. You know, I'll save them from that, because as a parent, you just want to do whatever you can. So there, I lost my identity, because I thought moving from where I had community, where I had my parents 4 doors up from me, and my dad fought me on it. He said, why are you doing this? Why are you moving? We're here. We're right here. The kids can walk across the street. And I thought, Dad, I have to. I don't want the kids, I want them to have a good school district. Right. You know, I want them to I want them to succeed. And look at what happened. I moved them up here, and my youngest son's in prison now. You know, so crime does not discriminate. Drugs do not discriminate.
Right.
We know, at least I know, the models that we have set up now for reintegration are completely deplorable. I go down to hire all these ex-cons all the time. Every one of them's high. And unless I go down and get them, they're not going to go out and get a job. So I go down and use them. They steal my tools. I tell them, pendejo, why'd you do that? And I can't use it anymore. Or they come to my work with a knife, because they're used to carrying a knife because they think the world's going to get them. Or I don't know. Many of you have probably had different experiences with that. You probably have had great experiences with individuals that you're trying to reintegrate, and you've had good experiences with that. And what are the kind of things that you can do to promote positive change in the system?
I didn't realize there was anything that was wrong with me or where I lived until I went to school. I was surprised because we got along with everybody. We have African Americans in the community. We had white people in our community, and we all got along, and we went to church together. We played sports together. I didn't learn there's anything wrong with that until we got to school, and I started hearing about the stereotypes, kind of as you were talking about, in prison. One of my best friends, next door neighbor, basically, who ended up in prison for a few years, today is a successful restaurateur with probably about 5 or 6 locations in Albuquerque. Also has a construction company. I think, with that stereotype that we impose, that people impose on us and that we impose on ourselves, it's a tough battle. It's really a tough battle, because you're hearing it from, this is the way you're supposed to be, exactly as you're saying in prison. I saw that out in the street yards too. As I got a little bit older in middle school, I started hearing and seeing what you're describing. I didn't see that as a young child, but it started to become a thing. And, that is tough when you're looking at how you're supposed to be and how things should be, and how do we get past that? How do we get out of that? And I've seen success stories. I know them. I could take you to their houses. I can show you what they're doing these days. Right. And the problem I always face, conclusion I always come back to, is that a lot of it really depends on the individual and their support system, because the truth of the matter, society doesn't care.
Yeah.
That's the truth of the matter. People don't care. In fact, in many respects, it's beneficial for society to have a group of people that are not educated and not functioning and not, and you can get into all kinds of, theories about that, the sort of the industrial complex around, the prison industry, whatever. I mean, that's just, so it comes back to us. It comes back to our families. It comes back to our support system, and we're not gonna succeed all the time. But I think that we have to kind of get into the mindset of that, that you can do more. That you can do more, and I think dealing with the fact that society is really nonchalant, to be generous, and probably intentional, to be truthful about how we are. And I think that because of that, we just have to understand that and go into the right, framework. And I'm all about prevention in terms of some of my initiatives that I'm thinking about in the schools, and how do we get into the schools and show them stories of things that have happened to people. So before they get into that. So I think the responsibility falls on me and the other people that I know in the community. It is my community, it is our people. It is people that care about us, which are not a lot, but I think we just simply have to take that responsibility on our own shoulder to redesign what life could be.
I think you hit on some really good points. Number one, before I forget, there's not a lot of people who care, but I think that doesn't discount them as not potentially caring. I think what you hit. I have friends of mine who inherited lots of money. They didn't care about anybody in prison till I sat down at dinner with them and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Can you help me with some money?" And she says, "Sure. How much do you need?" And then, "Can you help this person with some money? Can you help that person?" And she says, "Yeah, no, I'll help everybody you want. Let's do it." But I educated them, right? The other thing is this. The other thing that I'm finding out is that we have an epidemic of our inability to trust each other. So I was thinking, what's stopping us from creating support groups like the Blacks on the East Coast? They got support groups everywhere. Everywhere. I mean, all my writer friends have support groups. There's not one Latino support group. I'm like, there has to be some in Baltimore, New York, Boston, whatever. There has to be a lot of them in LA and South that I don't know about. But here in New Mexico, there's something about, we've grown not to trust what so why when people come out of prison, I did a documentary in Tierra Maria, and as you nailed it again, I went in there with a film crew, and the thing that got them trusting each other and working hard to write their stories and stuff was their stories. Oh, yeah, sabes que my grandpa and I used to go get wood up here. And I said, "Well, can you write about that?" "Yeah." "What about the when my grandma planted that tree? It's a big cottonwood now. Write about that." And man, it's like they would open their hearts to you when you want to listen to their stories. And then they begin to trust you because you find some meaning in what they're saying to you. All of a sudden, they came to class, not because they were going to have dreams of being poets or writers. They came to class because it became a support group.
What you said earlier, Jimmy, about the infrastructure for people that are getting out being deplorable is accurate, right? And I don't know if we have the luxury of not caring. Like, if we set aside just the human dignity of it, right? Caring about people being humiliated, caring about people being disposed by society, even if you don't care about that, something like 95% of the people in our prisons and jails are eventually going to be back in our communities. And we don't have a plan. We don't have structures set up so that those folks can succeed. So what happens to them? There's public safety issues that go along with it. Crimes are recommitted and they end up right back in the system. If the only thing we care about is community safety, the safety of our own kids and neighborhoods, even with that alone, we have to have a plan. We have to care as a society, and those structures have to be robust. There has to be jobs programs, there has to be education, there has to be hand-holding of the kind you mentioned. I
Hand-holding.
see that all the time with our clients. Every step of the way, someone has to help them so that they can succeed, and people can succeed. You're living proof of that. Actually, I mean, let's talk about that. People can be redeemed. People deserve second chances. It's in the best interest of everyone that people not just get second chances, but third and fourth. Will some people still fail? Yes, they will. But a lot of people can find a path if we give them a path. And right now, we're not giving them.
You know what I did reintegration type? I went to the La Tuna, the federal prison, and I did a writing retreat. I do a lot of prisons all over the world. Not anymore, but I used to. I'm a little bit too tired now. But the warden gave me this idea. He was going to retire, but he wanted to continue his work with prisoners, but outside of the prison model. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, I want to create like a format where I can teach prisoners how to make it. Because I've been a warden for 50 years and I've been watching them and I know where all the mistakes are. So next thing you know, I got this warden writing a book and he's attending my writing retreats annually. I give one a year and he shows up and I'm like, I feel a little bit nervous, man. I mean, I already got 4 cops over here. Now you, so anyway, so the warden shows up and next year he shows up again. This time he's got a book and he wants to show it to me. And I'm like, wow. And it's a textbook on how not to go back to prison. I'm like, orale. And then I said, why don't you start taking it in? Why don't you start taking it into prisons? He's like, that's what I'm doing, Jimmy. So okay, I want you to help me do this and do that. I said, no problem, I'll help you. So as of today, he's got 2 textbooks, and he travels America working with, and what better way to get into prison than as an ex-warden? Of a federal prison. Isn't that cool?
That's amazing.
So he's now based in Tucson, where he has offices, and he has an intellectual component to his program, and probably some of you would like a spiritual component to his program. So he combines spirituality with intellectual, with scholarly work, and it's in his textbook. And I told him, man, and not only that, a lot of the guys who come to my writing retreat are men and women who have done 20, 30 years. One guy gets in his car every year, and he did 32 years in prison, and is an old guy, and he still works, but he somehow finds the strength to get in that car and come, and I'm happy to announce that he will have his novel published soon. So everybody who comes there has been told, now this is an interesting thing. I didn't plan it that way. I started the writing retreats 20 years ago, and only for the rich people. I was charging them $5,000, but only 5 showed up. And then I said, no, I don't want to just cater to the rich people. So we went down to 1,500. Still, rich people showed up. 3 days, Ghost Ranch. Oh, Georgia O'Keeffe, that kind of thing. Then I said, no, that's not going to work for me. We got to go down to 500. I got to get some gente, right? So that was too much. So now we're going to go down to 250. So I got all these people that have been told they could never write a book, and every single one of them had a story to tell. So they were there to learn how to write that book. Turns out that a third of them were ex-cons. They all came in. We had guys that were writing for PEN America, PEN. We had guys that were writing for the New York Times. All these guys that were, as you said, ex-convicts who were really, really making it, came there to create family. I don't know. But 2/3 of the people there were upper middle class white people doing really well. They were principals of private schools. They were professors. They were writers, artists, dancers, whatever. But 1/3 of those people had been through the system. If you offer them a forum in which to meet and support each other, for lack of a better word, miracles can happen. And they continue to happen.
I have friends. I have a friend in particular I'm thinking of that who did time in federal prison, as did most of his sons, and or all of them, I think. they are all became successful business people, contractors, car salesmen, body shop. I mean, they're all extremely successful. So there is a the path, there is that, and I don't know, and I don't know, and I see it from from my youth, and I see it from my as an attorney from a professional standpoint, and I don't understand why that happens in terms of you're in that situation, you're incarcerated, you get out, and then suddenly your the trajectory of your life changes. I don't quite understand that. I think our goal and role is to encourage families. Like Kim is just so amazing what she does. What you're doing professionally is really amazing. What you're doing in terms of writing, and I think there are people out there that do and can support and encourage those, because there is that possibility, and
Sure.
it's likely. But I also think, if I may just make one quick pitch for a little program that I'm working on, I'm working with a group of people whose mission is to increase the number of social workers in our community, especially people of color.
Mm.
And apparently, there are certain barriers in our system here in New Mexico that are preventing people from passing, especially people of color, if you look at the numbers, from getting licensed as social workers. And so the goal of this group is to recruit more individuals into this profession, to support them while in this profession, because it's hard work, and to fully compensate them, because they deserve to have fair compensation, because those people, I believe, are trained. They are trained to support the family, and because they know they can connect the resources to the needs, because they can analyze, triage the situation, and then say, okay, this is what direction we want to send you in. So I just think that is something that we really need to look at, is having more social workers in all of our institutions. With the police departments, I know the sheriff's office has gone into hiring social workers. APD has done that as well.
I think it's a great idea.
The prisons, certainly the jails. I just think we just need more.
Boy, you sure nailed. That's a really, it's an interesting thing too about the police. I don't think we can leave them out. I don't think you leave the police out of this equation. I don't think you leave wardens or guards out.
Yeah, I think in my mind I separate it into small and big solutions, right? And the small solutions are the ones we're talking about here a little bit. You have to be able to reach out to people, build community. The folks I know who've been successful after getting out are, my own friends, my own acquaintances, are people with close family connections, right? It can even just be like a girlfriend that supports them, stays with them all those years, and gives them a place to be when they get out, and also a clean space, not just surrounded by guns and drugs.
Right.
Those are the small solutions that are super important. I'm not trivializing that. I think that's why there are some people, even with the way things are set up now in the United States, who can be successful, who can find a path. I think we can create more paths for more people too, with just changing the way some big picture things work. In the United States, we don't like to look at other countries for solutions, but there are many other countries, most free democratic countries, that are doing a much better job than the United States when it comes to incarceration, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to crime. We should care about that. Norway is in no way the same as the United States, right? It's a very different place. It's homogenous. They don't have the gun problem we have. All of that is true. But it is helpful to look at their prison system, which you go to prison there, it looks like a college campus. People are in pleasant spaces. They are treated with dignity, and their prison system is freaking tiny, which I think is one change we could make here. We can't channel all this money into all of these institutions and expect success. Some people will have to be separated from society if they're violent and repeat offenders, certainly. But there aren't that many people if we can provide people with jobs, good educations, access to healthcare, access to decent housing. All those things other countries do that we are completely failing at.
You know, I got to tell you, and this will cover at least 5 questions.
Good. Efficiency.
Okay. Okay. Look, one of the two of the things I had to do in order to make it, and it has to do a lot with confidence in yourself and stuff like that. But you got to cut the connections to your drug friends.
For sure.
And these are camaradas that you grow up with all your life.
Yeah.
And they are not going to understand it. You don't have to demonize them, and you don't have to denigrate them. You just have to say, mira. But you have to understand that taking drugs is a culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just taking drugs. It's a whole culture. It's like being a banker, being a lawyer, being a doctor. You're surrounded with all your peers, and that's what you do. That's how you fill the hours of your day. You're surrounded with a culture. You take drugs. When you tell your friends, mira, I can't do this, you know. I mean, I'm gonna have to. I'm not gonna say goodbye. I love you. I'm always gonna call me up. Hey, ¿qué huele? You know, what are you doing? Not much. But when you tell me come on over, I'm not gonna say I'm not, but I'm not. I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna come over. I'll say okay. I'll see if I get some time today, but I'm not coming over, because you can't be around that environment because that's your culture, right? But here's the problem. What do I fill my time up with? What do I fill it up with? I need to have some place I can go to. I need to have people I can talk to. I need to go to the lawyer's office, and I need to be the janitor, and I need to be able to maybe be a Uber driver at night. But I've got to start filling up this time to make a plan for myself, a life plan. Because if you tell me not to leave this culture, you're throwing me into this deep pit of loneliness and disconnection. I've got to have something that establishes me as a social member of this society. Give me something. Give me anything. Just give me something that I can get up in the morning for. That's the thing. When you create that vacuum, you've got to fill it with something. Otherwise, your efforts are futile. You're not going to do anything. Okay, number one, you got to cut your connection to all your friends. And that means you're not going to have that culture anymore. And it's the only culture you know that gets you by your loneliness, your despair, your self-doubt, your self-loathing, your self-everything. That's the only thing that gets you by, is go to your cultural friends and do coke and forget about your despair. Forget about your fear of making it happen. Forget about this didn't happen, your wife wants the bills paid, you don't know where the money's going. Forget that. Just stay in our culture and we'll make you forget it. When you get home at night, you'll be buzzed, it'll be good. Okay? And that happens every day. Days turn into months, months turn into years. Before you realize you're a gray-haired man still doing freaking coke, right? Never dealt with your real issues. But you take that culture away from the person, you have to create a new culture.
It has to be hard to have the strength to cut off those damaging relationships, which we all have, right? But it's a level of degree. In that circumstance, when you have people, in a culture of guns and drugs, like putting up that wall for your own safety is hard. And I see that a lot with our clients. The other thing our clients deal with is a concept we in the legal world call collateral consequences, which is when you get some criminal conviction, it doesn't just screw you up in terms of you getting prison time, right? You have everything else harder. You have it's so much harder to get a job, right? We talk about how important that is, but that's so hard when you have a criminal conviction. And a host of other things are more difficult too. I think figuring out as a society how to help people navigate around those collateral consequences gives people a smoother access point and the ability for them to get out and stay out, which is the hard part, I think, and not cycle
Colonialism.
in and
We expect help from you.
out. Right.
When we come out of prison, don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. We expect free stuff, Like, why can't you go there and do a law for us that says, we get a free little house or something? I mean, for some reason, we expect you to give us money. Even though we came out of prison, we assume that your lives are so easy that you haven't earned any of the merits that you enjoy. We think, no, you guys got it made. You guys got everything given to you. So you need to give me this.
Yeah.
And when we don't get it and we don't know how to get it ourselves in order to fulfill that disappointment, we go do coke or we go do whatever we do, right?
Right.
Because we expect you to give me money.
Well,
Like,
giving people a big stack of cash when they're fresh out of prison is probably not the best idea in the world. But
No.
there's right.
You want to see a smile? You give an ex-convict coming out
Yeah.
of prison a bunch of cash, he'll be like, "You're my friend."
Yeah.
You know, but you say no to him, and the question arises: why did you assume that I would? Because you
Right.
think that you're owed something. That you think that,
Yeah.
that there's been enough damage that society owes you something, and if you don't get it, then you're going to take.
That's so funny, right? There's two ways to look at it, right?
Yeah.
There's something that you can give the individual who's getting out that they might expect, right? And society at large is going to have this visceral like reaction, like, no, I'm not giving these people anything, right? But the funny thing is it's better for everyone, for our communities at large, to figure out how to give people something, some support. You know, it's definitely not going to be a stack of cash, because I don't think that's a good idea, you know, demonstrably, because people don't have the often don't have the judgment and the structure in their lives to do something positive with it. But education, jobs, access to healthcare, access to decent housing, those are a no-brainer.
That would be great. If they-
No-brainer.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
And I think, Steve, you're absolutely right. Those three things are, are absolutely written down here and every place else. But I think you have to explain it to people in a way that how it does benefit them, right? The greater society. It benefits society to have people more educated, to have access to healthcare, mental health care, and affordable health. There's a benefit to society, and that's what I think the task is to how do you explain it? We all in this room care for different reasons, right? But a lot of people out there that don't. So how do we convince society at large that it is beneficial for them to provide the opportunities for people to get educated and to receive health care and to, because it does benefit. It's very expensive to
Right.
incarcerate people. It's cheaper to provide outpatient. It drives me crazy. It's crazy. And I'm not a writer, but I did write an essay one time just out of sheer frustration. And it called New Mexico a state in crisis, something to that effect. Just in the last 24 hours, I saw something on TV. 25% of our kids live in poverty. We're 50th in the country in child welfare per the Ann Casey Foundation.
Yeah.
About 2 months ago, I read in the New York Times that we're 51st in education. I didn't even know there were 51 states. I don't know how we became 51st in the country in education. and that drives me absolutely crazy that our society functions, allows that to occur.
Yes.
So again, I take responsibility as an individual. I know Kim takes responsibility as an individual. I know you do, as part of the community. I know you do. We all take responsibility. It starts with us and what we can do. But I think we do really need to make that argument to society that this is good, not just for me, not just for us, but for everybody. And I think that argument can easily be made in terms of reduction in crime, providing skilled labor, and not having to pay as much, and having people that are productive and paying taxes. So I think that's the task, is to make that argument. I think that argument can easily be made.
You're right, Frank. The thing is, and it took it. You know what? There's nothing that will fortify a man's self-respect or bolster a man's morality than giving that man enough resources to share with others. So the comic comes out, expects you to give him stuff because he sees the inequities. He sees the inequities. He says, okay, this guy just got away with murder because he had money. You know what? All I'm asking you for is this. You can't do that for me, screw you. Because in their eyes, society is built on inequities. One misdeed on top of the other misdeed, all justified by the amount of money you have brought to the table. So if I have a huge amount of money, I can pretty much bypass any law I want. That's the common kind of thing, right?
Do you think also that it may come from being incarcerated and the way that they handle things behind the walls with, oh, you help your homie out. Your homie doesn't have the the family support or a support from a significant other. So I'm going to give them half of my commissary. So do you think that maybe they come out with that same mentality?
Well, they come out with a really good instinct. Uh, they're willing to give their life for a camarada, for a carnal. They're willing to give their life for a carnal in a fight over a couple of grams of heroin. Say this guy stole the heroin, I'm going to collect it, and I'm like, I'll go with you. They jump in, I'll jump. If I have to kill him, I'll kill him. So when it comes to the loyalty thing, that's good. That's what we don't have in this society out here. Nobody's loyal to anyone in prison. So you have the loyalty, so you have to work on that. But the thing is, this is really the principle that I try to get to with people. You come out needy. How can I get you to a place where you're giving? Now, and then I say to them, how do I get you there? How do I get you where you're needy? And how do I get you to a place where you're, and this is the word that scares them more than anything, because with this, you have to have self-esteem. You have to have confidence. You have to have a vision. When you say the word, how can I get you to serve? And they think it's the most horrible word in the dictionary, but there are those who make it, then become amazing people who serve others.
Yeah, there's a point of balance there, isn't
There
there?
is.
That people often don't have when they're inside or just getting out, which is and you see that out in the society too, right? People are either super selfish or they're sometimes I see it in my world where people are ground down as individuals too, because their whole life is service, right? Well, like, where do you get that balance? You're looking out for yourself and you care about your community.
You know where it is?
Tell
And
me.
this has been the proof in the pudding for me, is you have to live it.
Right.
You got to live it.
My daughter is a doula here, and she was at a UNM hospital about a week and a half ago, and she calls me and she says, "Mom, I went into the cafeteria to buy me something to drink, and there was this guy in front of me." She said, and I knew he just got out of prison just by the way he was interacting with the lady at the cashier, at the register, and he didn't know how to use his phone to pay.
Oh, yeah. Very
And then finally, I guess the lady helped him, and she said, and she goes, "I knew God was prompting me to speak to him." She said, and I didn't. She said, "I went about my business, went back upstairs, came back down, and he was outside smoking a cigarette." She said, "So I walked up to him and she said, 'Hey, can I sit down here with you?' And he's like, 'Yeah, sure.'" So, she sat there, they started having conversation, and, she started speaking to him about, my mom works with advocacy, my little brother's in prison. So she said, you should connect with my mom, because he said he wanted to get involved. So she calls me and she tells me right away that she met this guy, and she gives me his number. So I call him the next day because he's still in the hospital. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, this is Kim, Brittany's mom. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the advocacy work that you want to do." He just got out of Florence, the federal prison in Florence, got out on June 18th, and then had some kind of spinal thing happen and went into the hospital on the 19th from the halfway house. So I spoke with him, and he says, "I really want to get involved." He said, "I'm tired of that life. I spent half my life in prison." I said, "You know what? I'm going to come by and see you." So I went yesterday, but on Saturday I contacted him, and he said, "I'll be honest with you. I didn't think you were going to come. I thought you were just blowing smoke up my ass."
Yeah.
But I showed up, and I spent 3 hours with him, and he shared his story with me. He walked me out of the hospital yesterday. He said, "I had so much pride in prison." He said, "A couple of years ago, I would have never walked you out in this, pushing an IV, and wearing a pajama gown. But, I just, like I said, I think that extending love and showing our people love, it's all about servanthood. And when they learn how to serve and give love, and it's reciprocated, then they feel that, because a lot of them haven't grown up that way. A lot of them are birthed into survival from day one.